Your father worked 2 jobs, maybe 3. He left before sunrise and came home after dark. His hands were rough, his back was sore. His weekends were just the days he worked a different kind of tired. He didn't complain, or if he did it quietly in a language of sighs and silence that you learned to read before you could read actual words. He did it for you, so you could have more, so you could have better, so you could have the life he didn't get to live. That was the deal. His generation sacrifices so the next generation can rise. His 2 jobs were supposed to buy you one good one. And maybe they did. Maybe you have the 1 job, the steady paycheck, the benefits, the desk instead of the construction site, the air conditioning instead of the factory floor. By every visible measure, the sacrifice worked. You rose. You're doing better than he did. You're living the life his 2 jobs were supposed to purchase. So why does it still feel like you're barely getting by? Why does the 1 job that was supposed to be the reward still not cover everything? Why are you doing the same math he did, stretching the same paycheck across the same too long month, making the same calculations about what can wait and what can't? Why does your financial stress feel suspiciously similar to the financial stress you watched him carry, just in a different uniform? Because the poverty loop doesn't break that easily. The loop isn't just about income. If it were just about income, your father's sacrifice would have worked perfectly. You earn more than he did. Problem solved. But the loop is about something deeper and more structural than the number on the paycheck. The loop is a self-reinforcing system of economic constraints, psychological programming, social positioning, and institutional barriers that reproduces financial limitation across generations, even when the individual members of those generations are working harder than anyone around them. The loop doesn't care about your effort. It was designed to absorb effort without producing escape. Let me give you the numbers that explain why working harder hasn't worked. Research on economic mobility reveals that intergenerational income persistence is remarkably strong. Studies consistently show that a significant portion of a person's earning potential is predicted by their parents' income, not their talent, not their effort, not their education, their parents' income. The economic class you're born into is one of the strongest predictors of the economic class you'll die in. Not because mobility is impossible. Some people do escape the loop, but because the forces holding the loop in place are structural, systematic, and far more powerful than individual effort alone can overcome. Your father knew this, not in academic terms, in body terms, in the bone-deep knowledge that the system wasn't built for people like him, and the best he could do was position you slightly better within a game that was never designed for either of you to win. His 2 jobs weren't a path to wealth. They were a buffer against complete collapse, and the buffer worked. You didn't collapse, but you also didn't escape. You just moved one rung up a ladder that's much taller than anyone told you. This audiobook is about the loop, what it is, how it works, why individual effort alone can't break it, what actually can, and how to be the generation that doesn't just survive the loop but disrupts it for every generation that follows. 5 chapters. The anatomy of the poverty loop, the invisible costs of growing up without money, how the system reinforces the loop at every level, what actually breaks the cycle, and how to build the bridge your father couldn't. 1 hour, not about blame, Not about excuses, about seeing clearly, for the first time, the full architecture of the thing that's been holding your family in place for generations, because you can't escape what you can't see. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of the Loop. Why working harder doesn't work. The poverty loop is not a single problem. It's a system. A self-reinforcing system with multiple components that interact to produce a stable outcome. Financial limitation. The components feed each other. Each one makes the other stronger. And the system, once established, requires extraordinary force to disrupt. Not because the people inside it are deficient, because the system is efficient. Brutally, mechanically, impersonally efficient at maintaining the conditions that keep it running. Let me map the components. Component 1. The income trap. Your father worked 2 jobs and earned enough to survive. Not to save, not to invest, not to build, to survive. Every dollar that came in went out. Rent, food, utilities, transportation, maybe a little left over that was immediately consumed by an unexpected expense, because unexpected expenses when you're poor aren't unexpected at all. They're inevitable. The car breaks down. The kid gets sick. Something in the house needs repair. These aren't emergencies. They're the baseline cost of existing without a financial buffer. And without a buffer, every minor setback is a crisis. And every crisis consumes whatever marginal surplus might have been building. This is crucial. The income trap isn't about spending too much. It's about the mathematical reality that when income barely covers essential expenses, there is no pathway to accumulation regardless of how disciplined the spending is. You can't budget your way out of an income that doesn't exceed your costs. And for millions of families, the income doesn't exceed the costs, not because the spending is frivolous. Because the costs of housing, health care, childcare, food, and transportation have risen faster than wages for decades. Your father wasn't bad with money. He was doing advanced financial engineering with insufficient inputs. He was solving a calculus problem with an arithmetic budget. And the fact that he kept the family housed and fed and together on those inputs is a financial achievement that no MBA could replicate. Component 2. The time deficit. When you're working 2 or 3 jobs to maintain survival-level income, you don't have time. Not for rest. Not for relationships. Not for skill development. Not for the strategic thinking that could lead to higher-earning opportunities. Not for the kind of networking that opens doors in middle-class and professional circles. Not for the education that could change your economic position. Your father didn't have time because all of his time was consumed by the act of earning survival. And this is the loop's most efficient feature. It uses all of your available time to maintain the current level, leaving no time to work toward a different level. You're running on a treadmill that requires maximum effort just to stay in place. The speed required to move forward doesn't exist because the treadmill is already at full speed. Most people miss this about the time deficit's generational impact. Your father's time deficit wasn't just his problem. It was yours. The hours he spent at the second and third job were hours he wasn't spending with you, weren't helping with homework, weren't modeling professional behavior, weren't building the kind of relationship that provides emotional security and guidance during the critical years when career orientation develops. He wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was absent because the loop took his time in exchange for the family's survival, and the cost of that absence didn't show up in the monthly budget. It showed up in your development, in the guidance you didn't receive, in the opportunities you didn't know existed because nobody in your immediate world had time to show them to you. Component 3. The opportunity desert. Poverty concentrates geographically. Poor families live in poor neighborhoods. Poor neighborhoods have underfunded schools. Underfunded schools produce students with fewer skills, fewer connections, and fewer pathways to economic mobility. The jobs available in poor neighborhoods are disproportionately low wage. The businesses are survival-oriented. The professional networks are thin or non-existent. The successful people who could serve as models, mentors, and connectors have, by definition, left. Because success in the loop is measured by escape. And escape means leaving the neighborhood, which means leaving behind the people who haven't escaped yet. Here's what actually happens to a child growing up in an opportunity desert. Their sense of what's possible is shaped by what they can see, and what they can see is limited. They see the jobs their parents work. They see the jobs their neighbors work. They see the path from school to the same limited set of options that everyone around them has taken. The professional world, the world of careers and growth and strategic advancement, is invisible, not hidden deliberately, just absent from T. He landscape. A child growing up in an affluent neighborhood sees professionals, sees offices, sees people leaving for business trips and coming home to discuss their projects. The career possibilities are in the air. They're the background of daily life. A child in the opportunity desert breathes different air, and the absence of visible possibility doesn't create ambition. It creates a ceiling that the child doesn't know is there because they've never seen the space above it. Component 4. The cost of being poor. Poverty is expensive. This sounds paradoxical. It isn't. It's one of the most well-documented features of economic inequality. People with less money pay more for almost everything. They pay more for financial services because they use check cashing services and payday lenders instead of banks that require minimum balances they can't maintain. They pay more for transportation because they can't afford reliable vehicles and end up spending more on repairs, or they rely on public transit systems that consume hours of their day. They pay more for food because they live in food deserts where the cheapest options are the least nutritious, and the resulting health problems create medical costs that further drain their resources. They pay more for housing relative to quality because landlords in low-income areas have less competition and less incentive to maintain properties. They pay more for credit because their credit scores, damaged by the instability that poverty creates, result in higher interest rates on everything. Every one of these higher costs is extracted from an income that's already insufficient. The loop doesn't just limit income. It inflates costs simultaneously, creating a squeeze from both sides that leaves no room for the accumulation that could eventually provide escape. Component 5. The emergency vulnerability. Financial planning requires a future orientation. The ability to make decisions today that benefit you tomorrow, next month, next year. But when you're living in the loop, there is no future orientation. There is only the current emergency, the current bill, the current shortage, the current crisis that requires immediate attention and immediate resource allocation. Your father wasn't thinking about investment portfolios. He was thinking about whether the rent check would clear. He wasn't planning for retirement. He was planning for Friday. And that's not a failure of planning. It's a rational response to a situation where the present is so demanding that the future is a luxury you can't afford to consider. The real reason working harder doesn't break the loop is that the loop is designed to convert effort into maintenance, not progress. Every additional hour your father worked was absorbed by the system, by the costs that inflate as income rises marginally, by the emergencies that consume any surplus, by the time deficit that prevents strategic advancement, by the opportunity desert that limits available options. Working harder within the loop doesn't break the loop. It reinforces it. It makes you more efficient at surviving inside the same system. And survival, no matter how impressive, is not escape. Your father's 2 jobs didn't fail. They succeeded at exactly what the loop allows: survival with dignity, maintenance of the family, positioning the next generation slightly higher on the same ladder. But the ladder is inside the loop. And climbing higher on a ladder inside a loop still leaves you inside the loop. The escape requires something different. But before we get there, we need to look at the invisible costs you're carrying from growing up inside it. Chapter 2: The Invisible Inheritance. What growing up without money does to your operating system. You inherited something from your father's sacrifice, not money. Money was the thing there was never enough of. You inherited a way of being in the world, a psychological operating system calibrated for survival in resource-scarce environments. This operating system was adaptive in childhood. It kept you functional inside the loop. But in adulthood, as you try to move beyond the loop, the operating system itself becomes the obstacle. The thing that helped you survive the loop is now the thing preventing you from escaping it. Let me name the components of this inherited operating system. Inheritance 1. Hypervigilance about money. You can't relax about finances. Even when things are objectively okay, there's a tension in your body around money, a watchfulness, a readiness for the other shoe to drop, because in your childhood the other shoe always dropped. The car broke. The hours got cut. The bill came that couldn't be paid. Your nervous system learned that financial stability is temporary and financial crisis is inevitable, so it stays alert, perpetually scanning for the next threat. This hypervigilance served you as a child. It prepared you for the instability of a resource-scarce environment. As an adult, it prevents you from the calm, strategic, long-term financial thinking that wealth building requires. You can't invest for 30 years when your nervous system is bracing for next Tuesday. This is crucial. The hypervigilance isn't anxiety in the clinical sense, though it can develop into that. It's a survival calibration. Your nervous system was tuned to a specific environment, an environment where resources were unstable and threats were frequent. That tuning doesn't automatically adjust when the environment changes. You can move to a safer economic position, and your body still operates as if the crisis is coming. Because the body's threat detection system doesn't read bank statements, it runs on patterns established during development, and the patterns say that this is not safe. This will not last. Prepare for loss. Inheritance 2. Scarcity mindset as default mode. You think in terms of not enough, not consciously, automatically. There's not enough money, not enough time, not enough opportunity, not enough of anything. Even when there is enough objectively, your brain processes the world through a lens of limitation. Behavioral research on scarcity mindset shows that the experience of scarcity fundamentally changes cognitive processing. It narrows attention. It focuses the mind on the immediate shortage at the expense of everything else. It reduces the cognitive bandwidth available for planning, creativity, and strategic thought. The scarcity mindset is like a tax on your thinking, a cognitive toll that you pay continuously because your brain was formatted by an environment where scarcity was the constant condition. Most people miss this about how the scarcity mindset transmits across generations. You didn't just learn scarcity from your own childhood experiences. You absorbed it from the people around you, from your father's tension around money, from your mother's calculations at the grocery store, from the household atmosphere of not enough that was so pervasive it was invisible, like growing up in a house with a particular smell. You can't smell it because it's the only air you've ever breathed. The scarcity mindset is your air. You don't notice it, but it influences every financial decision you make, every opportunity you evaluate, every risk you assess. Through the filter of not enough, through the lens of loss, through the expectation that any gain will be followed by a corresponding loss because that's how the world worked when you were 7. Inheritance 3. Class-based imposter syndrome. You got the education, you got the job, you're in rooms that your father never entered, and you feel like a fraud not because you're underqualified, because the room doesn't feel like it belongs to you. The professional world has unwritten codes, ways of speaking, ways of presenting, ways of navigating social situations, assumptions about shared experiences and shared references that everyone seems to know except you. The vacation destinations, the childhood activities, the cultural references, the ease with which people discuss investments and property and career strategy as if these things are natural extensions of being alive. You learn to perform in these rooms, to mimic the codes, to sound like you belong, but the performance requires energy. Constant, invisible energy spent monitoring your presentation, adjusting your language, hiding the gaps in your cultural fluency. Energy that your colleagues from middle-class and affluent backgrounds don't spend because for them, the room is native territory. For you, it's foreign soil that you've learned to navigate but will never feel natural on. And that energy difference compounds. They use their cognitive resources for the work itself. You use a portion of yours for the performance of belonging, and the performance tax is invisible to everyone except you. Here's what actually happens when class-based imposter syndrome meets professional advancement. You self-limit, not consciously, but through a pattern of hesitations, deflections, and missed opportunities that keep you positioned slightly below where your talent would place you. You don't apply for the promotion because the role feels like it's for people from a different world. You don't negotiate aggressively because asking for more feels presumptuous for someone from your background. You don't network strategically because the social dynamics of professional networking feel foreign and uncomfortable in ways you can't articulate. Each hesitation is small. Each one is individually explicable. But collectively, they form a pattern of self-limitation rooted not in ability, but in the deep, pre-verbal conviction that people like you don't belong in rooms like this. Inheritance 4. Loyalty guilt. You rose, your family didn't. At least not all of them. Not at the same pace. Not to the same level. And the distance between your current life and the life you came from creates a guilt that has no name in any language you know and no obvious resolution in any framework you've encountered. You feel guilty for having more than your siblings, for living in a better neighborhood than the one you grew up in, for having options your cousins don't have, for the invisible barrier that now separates your daily experience from theirs. You sit at their table during holidays, and you feel the distance even when nobody mentions it, maybe especially when nobody mentions it, because the silence around the distance is louder than any conversation about it would be. You manage this guilt through financial codependence, lending money you can't afford to lend and never expecting it back, because expecting it back would make you the kind of person who puts money above family. Supporting family members in ways that drain your own financial stability, because saying no would feel like pulling the ladder up behind you. Being the family's unofficial bank, emergency fund, and insurance policy because you're the one who made it, and making it apparently comes with an unlimited obligation to fund everyone else's emergencies indefinitely. Not because you're endlessly generous, because the guilt of escape demands payment. Constant, ongoing, never fully paid payment. And that payment is a persistent, invisible financial drain that keeps you closer to the loop than your income would otherwise place you. The cruelest dimension of loyalty guilt is that it's self-reinforcing. Every dollar you give from guilt reduces your own financial progress. Reduced financial progress keeps you closer to the loop. Staying closer to the loop reduces the distance between you and your family, which temporarily alleviates the guilt, until you try to pull ahead again, and the guilt returns, and the giving resumes, and the cycle continues. The loop doesn't just hold you through economics, it holds you through love. Through the bonds that should be your greatest strength, but become, inside the loop's logic, your most effective constraint. Inheritance 5. Short-term financial orientation. Your father planned in weeks, maybe months, never years, because planning in years requires the belief that you'll be stable in years, and stability in the loop is never assured. You inherited this time horizon. Your financial thinking is short-term by default. The idea of investing for decades feels abstract, theoretical, like something that happens to other people in other lives. Saving for a future that you can't quite believe in feels like fantasy. The money that's here now feels real. The money that might be there in 30 years feels imaginary. So you make decisions optimized for now, not because you're short-sighted, because your nervous system was calibrated in an environment where now was all that existed. Long-term thinking is a privilege of people who had the luxury of believing in the long term. You didn't. The real reason this invisible inheritance matters is that it operates beneath the level of any financial strategy. You can have the best budget, the best investment plan, the best career strategy. If your operating system is still calibrated for survival inside the loop, it will undermine every strategy you implement. The hypervigilance will prevent long-term investing. The scarcity mindset will narrow your opportunities. The imposter syndrome will limit your advancement. The loyalty guilt will drain your accumulation. The short-term orientation will keep your planning horizon at months instead of decades. The invisible inheritance is the loop's most efficient mechanism. It escapes the external loop and carries the internal loop with you, wherever you go. Now let's look at how the system around you reinforces the loop from the outside, even when you're fighting it from the inside. Chapter 3. The System. How Institutions Reinforce the Loop at Every Level. The poverty loop isn't just psychological. It's institutional, built into the structure of the systems you interact with every day. And these structures aren't accidentally biased against people from low-income backgrounds. They're designed around assumptions that systematically disadvantage anyone who doesn't start with resources. Institutional Reinforcement 1. The education gap. School funding in many countries is tied to local property values. Wealthy neighborhoods fund wealthy schools. Poor neighborhoods fund poor schools. The children who need the most educational investment receive the least. Larger class sizes, fewer resources, fewer extracurricular opportunities, less experienced teachers, less access to advanced courses and college preparation programs. The education system doesn't level the playing field. It tilts it further. This is crucial. The education gap doesn't just affect academic knowledge. It affects what you know is possible. Students at well-funded schools are exposed to a wider range of career options, college pathways, and professional trajectories. They receive guidance from counselors with manageable caseloads who can actually advise them individually. They interact with parents who are professionals and can offer mentorship and internship connections. Students at underfunded schools receive less of everything. Less knowledge, less exposure, less connection, less guidance. And the gap between what these two groups know about how the world works, not academic knowledge but navigational knowledge, the understanding of how to move through institutions and systems, is immense. This navigational knowledge, sometimes called social capital or cultural capital, is never explicitly taught. It's absorbed through environment. And the environment of a well-funded school transmits it constantly. The environment of an underfunded school barely transmits it at all. Institutional Reinforcement 2. The hiring filter. Many employers filter candidates through criteria that correlate with economic background rather than job performance. University prestige, unpaid internship experience, professional network connections, geographic location, even communication style and cultural presentation. A candidate from an affluent background arrives at the hiring process with a prestigious degree funded by family resources. Internship experience made possible by parental financial support during unpaid positions. Professional connections built through family networks. And a communication style learned through years of exposure to professional environments. A candidate from the loop arrives with a degree from whichever institution was affordable, work experience that was paid because unpaid wasn't an option, a network limited to the community they grew up in, and a communication style calibrated for a different environment. Most people miss this about how the hiring filter perpetuates the loop. It's not that employers are deliberately discriminating against poor people. Most aren't. It's that the criteria they use as proxies for quality, university prestige, internship experience, network strength, are actually proxies for economic background. And by selecting for economic background while believing they're selecting for quality, the system continuously channels opportunity toward people who already have resources and away from people who don't. The loop reproduces itself through institutions that believe they're meritocratic while operating on criteria that reward prior advantage. Institutional reinforcement 3. The credit system. Your credit score, which affects your ability to rent housing, secure loans, access financial services, qualify for insurance rates, and in many cases even get hired because employers in some regions check credit as part of the hiring process, is fundamentally a measurement of your financial stability history. Not your character, not your responsibility, not your work ethic. Your financial stability history. Which is to say, it's a measurement of the economic conditions you existed in. People who grew up with money have better credit scores, not because they're more disciplined or more responsible or more deserving of lower interest rates, because their economic conditions allowed the things that build credit. Consistent on-time payment histories, because the money was always there to make payments. Low credit utilization because they didn't need to use credit for emergencies. Long credit histories because they were given credit cards by their parents at 18 to start building credit. Each of these credit-building advantages is a function of prior economic stability, not personal virtue. People from the loop have damaged credit because the loop produces exactly the conditions that damage credit scores systematically and predictably. Late payments during financial crises that weren't caused by irresponsibility, but by insufficient income meeting unexpected expenses. High utilization because the credit card isn't a convenience tool. It's the emergency fund that doesn't exist. Short credit history because access to mainstream credit came late, if it came at all, and the initial access was likely a predatory high-interest card, rather than the favorable introductory offer that affluent young people receive through family banking relationships. The credit system doesn't measure character or financial competence. It measures the presence or absence of a financial buffer across time. And then it penalizes the absence by making everything more expensive for exactly the people who can least afford to pay more. Here's what actually happens when the credit penalty compounds over a financial lifetime. Higher interest rates on auto loans mean higher monthly payments. Higher monthly payments mean less available income for savings. Less savings means continued reliance on credit during emergencies. Emergency credit use means higher utilization. Higher utilization means lower credit score. Lower credit score means higher interest rates. The cycle is self-reinforcing. It starts before you make your first financial decision as an adult, and it continues generating disadvantage through mechanisms that feel like neutral, objective measurements, but are actually measurements of the circumstances you were born into. Institutional reinforcement 4. The wealth-building infrastructure gap. The primary wealth-building tools available in most economies, home ownership and investment markets, are structured around assumptions that exclude people from the loop. Home ownership requires a down payment that assumes accumulated savings. Investment requires surplus income that assumes the basic expenses are already covered with room to spare. Retirement accounts offer tax advantages that are proportionally more valuable to higher earners. The entire infrastructure of wealth building is designed for people who already have the surplus that the loop prevents. Your father couldn't invest, not because he didn't know about index funds, because there was no money left after survival to put into an index fund. The wealth-building tools existed in theory. They were inaccessible in practice, and the gap between theoretical access and practical access is where the loop's institutional reinforcement is most efficient. The door is open, but the staircase leading to the door is missing. And the system congratulates itself on the open door while ignoring the absent stairs. The real reason the system matters is that it explains why individual effort alone, no matter how extraordinary, often produces only incremental movement within the loop rather than escape from it. Your father's effort was extraordinary. 2 jobs, 3 jobs, years of physical labor, sacrifice that most people in comfortable economic positions will never understand or need to make. And the system converted all of that effort into survival, not because the effort was insufficient. Because the system was designed to absorb exactly that amount of effort while maintaining the loop's fundamental structure. The loop doesn't break from individual effort. It bends, and then it springs back. So what actually breaks it? Chapter 4. What actually breaks the cycle? The levers that the loop doesn't want you to find. The loop is strong, stronger than individual willpower, stronger than personal discipline, stronger than working 2 jobs, but it's not invincible. People do escape. Families do break the cycle. The question is how. And the answer isn't the bootstraps narrative that the culture sells. Work hard and you'll succeed. You've seen that story disproven by your father's entire life. The answer is more specific, more strategic, and more structural than effort alone. Lever 1. Strategic skill acquisition, not education in the general sense, not a degree for the sake of a degree. Specific, deliberate development of skills that the marketplace pays a premium for. The loop keeps you in low-wage work because low-wage work is low-skill or low-demand work. The exit from low-wage work isn't harder effort at the same skill level. It's the acquisition of a different skill level entirely. A skill that is scarce enough, valuable enough, and demanded enough that the marketplace has to pay significantly for it. This is crucial. The skill doesn't need to require a 4-year degree. Some of the highest value skills in the modern economy can be acquired through focused self-education, certificate programs, apprenticeships, or deliberate practice. Digital skills, technical trades, sales ability, data analysis, specialized medical or legal support. These skills can dramatically alter earning potential within months to a few years rather than the decade that a traditional education pathway requires. The key is specificity, not "I'll get educated and then get a better job." Rather, "I will develop this specific skill, which this specific market segment pays this specific premium for, and I will be employable at this specific higher rate within this specific time frame." The loop loves vague ambition. It absorbs vague ambition effortlessly. It cannot absorb targeted skill acquisition aimed at a specific economic threshold. Lever 2. Network expansion beyond class boundaries. The loop is partially maintained by network homogeneity. You know people who know people like you, and the opportunities that circulate in your network are the same opportunities that have always circulated. Low wage, low ceiling, familiar. Breaking the loop requires deliberately building relationships with people outside your economic class, not abandoning your community. Expanding your network to include people who occupy the economic position you're moving toward. Most people miss this about why network expansion feels uncomfortable and why that discomfort is the point. Moving into social circles above your current economic position triggers imposter syndrome. It activates the class-based discomfort described in the previous chapter. It feels fake, presumptuous, like you're pretending to be someone you're not. But the discomfort is the signal that you're crossing a boundary. And the boundary between your current network and a more resource-rich network is exactly the boundary that the loop uses to contain you. The people who break the cycle are the people who tolerate the discomfort of being in rooms where they don't yet feel they belong, not because they're comfortable there, because they understand that the discomfort is temporary and the access is permanent. Lever 3. Financial literacy applied to the specific context of escaping the loop. General financial advice, as we discussed in previous audiobooks, is largely useless for people in the loop because it assumes a surplus that doesn't exist. But financial literacy specifically tailored to the loop's constraints is powerful. Understanding how to optimize limited resources, how to build credit strategically from a damaged starting point, how to identify and eliminate the poverty tax of predatory financial services, how to access the wealth-building infrastructure that exists but requires knowledge to navigate, government assistance programs, first-time homebuyer programs, matched savings programs, tax credits specifically designed for low-income earners. These resources exist. They're not widely advertised, and the people who most need them are the people least likely to know about them. Because the information circulates in networks they're not part of. Financial literacy for loop escape isn't about index funds. It's about knowing which doors exist and which ones you can open from where you currently stand. Here's what actually happens when strategic skill acquisition, network expansion, and targeted financial literacy combine. They create a compound effect that the loop can't absorb as easily as it absorbs raw effort. The skill increases income beyond the loop's equilibrium point. The network provides opportunities that the loop's geography doesn't contain. The financial literacy converts the increased income into wealth building rather than lifestyle inflation. Each lever alone provides incremental improvement. Together, they create the kind of systemic disruption that can actually produce escape rather than slightly more comfortable containment. Lever 4. Addressing the invisible inheritance directly. The psychological operating system described in the previous chapter, the hypervigilance, the scarcity mindset, the imposter syndrome, the loyalty guilt, the short-term orientation, these aren't just inconveniences. They're the loop's internal enforcement mechanism. And unless they're addressed directly, they will sabotage every external strategy. The person who builds income through skill acquisition but still operates on a scarcity mindset will fail to invest the surplus. The person who expands their network but carries crippling imposter syndrome will fail to leverage the connections. The internal work isn't optional. It's essential. This means therapy if you can access it, support groups, honest conversations with people who understand the loop because they've lived it, deliberate identification of the inherited patterns and conscious, ongoing work to develop new ones, not replacing the survival instincts that got you here, developing additional capacities alongside them, the ability to think long-term while also scanning for immediate threats, the ability to invest while also maintaining an emergency buffer, the ability to belong in new rooms while also honoring where you came from. Both and, not either or. Lever 5. Community-based economic strategies. Individual escape from the loop is possible but brutal. It requires one person to fight a systemic problem with personal resources. Community-based strategies are more sustainable and more effective because they create infrastructure that serves everyone inside the loop, not just the most determined individual. Collective skill sharing, where community members teach each other high-value skills. Cooperative economic ventures, where pooled resources create opportunities no individual could access alone. Mentorship networks that systematically connect those who have escaped the loop with those still navigating it. Community investment pools where small contributions from many families create meaningful capital for education and business ventures. Shared childcare arrangements that free up the time that the loop steals, allowing parents to invest in skill development and economic advancement instead of spending every available hour on survival tasks. The loop isolates. This is one of its most effective features. It keeps each family fighting individually against a problem that is structural and collective in nature. When every family is fighting alone, the system easily absorbs their individual efforts. The counter-strategy is collective action that creates a miniature infrastructure of support within the community itself. Not waiting for government programs, not waiting for institutional reform, not waiting for anyone to save you from the outside, building community-level systems that provide some of the advantages that affluent communities have always taken for granted. The shared knowledge, the pooled resources, the collective advocacy, the mutual support that turns individual survival efforts into communal economic progress. The real reason these levers work where pure effort doesn't is that they address the loop's actual mechanisms rather than simply pushing harder against its surface. Effort pushes against the loop. These levers disrupt the loop's internal structure. They change the skill level that determines your position in the labor market. They change the network that determines your access to opportunity. They change the financial knowledge that determines what you do with your income. They change the psychological patterns that determine how you relate to money and possibility. And they change the community infrastructure that determines whether you're fighting alone or fighting collectively. Now, the final chapter, the most personal one, how to build the bridge that your father couldn't build, not because he failed, because the tools weren't available to him. They might be available to you. Chapter 5. Building the Bridge. How to be the generation that breaks it. Your father built a platform, not a bridge, a platform. He lifted the family to a slightly higher position through raw effort and sacrifice. You're standing on that platform now, and the question isn't whether to honor what he built. You honor it by existing on it. The question is what you build on top of it. Another platform that lifts the next generation slightly higher within the loop, or a bridge that crosses to the other side entirely. Building the bridge means accepting an uncomfortable truth. What got your family here won't get your family there. Your father's strategy was maximum effort at available opportunities. That strategy produced survival and slight upward positioning. It was the right strategy for his situation. But replicating his strategy in your situation, working harder at the same kind of work, will produce the same kind of results, slightly better, still inside the loop. The bridge requires a different strategy. And developing a different strategy requires releasing the loyalty to his strategy that feels like honoring his sacrifice, but is actually perpetuating the limitation his sacrifice was meant to overcome. This is crucial. This is not disrespect. This is evolution. Your father didn't work 2 jobs so you could work 2 jobs. He worked 2 jobs so you wouldn't have to. And the way to honor that sacrifice isn't to replicate it. It's to use the platform he built to reach for something he couldn't. Something that requires not more effort but different effort. Strategic effort. Targeted effort. Effort directed at the specific levers that create escape rather than the general effort that creates survival. Bridge building step 1. Invest in your economic value ruthlessly. Every spare hour, every available dollar, every unit of energy that isn't consumed by immediate survival goes into increasing your economic value. Not your effort, your value. The difference matters enormously. Your father increased his effort, more hours, more jobs, more physical output. You need to increase your value, more skill, more expertise, more capability, more scarcity in what you offer. Because the market doesn't pay for effort. It pays for value. And value is determined by the intersection of skill, demand, and scarcity. Developing a skill that is in high demand and low supply changes your economic position more than any amount of additional hours at your current skill level. Most people miss this about how value investment works across generations. When you increase your economic value, you don't just increase your income. You change the starting position of your children. They grow up in a different economic environment with different schools, different networks, different exposures, different assumptions about what's possible. Your skill investment isn't a personal career strategy. It's a generational repositioning. You're not just climbing the ladder. You're moving the ladder to a different wall. Bridge building step 2. Build the financial bridge literally. This means accumulating assets, not income, assets. Things that generate value or appreciate over time independent of your labor. A home that builds equity. Investments that compound. A business that can operate beyond your personal hours. Skills that can be leveraged into multiple income streams. The shift from income to assets is the shift from the loop to escape, because income is vulnerable. It depends on your continued effort, your continued health, your continued employment. Assets persist. They grow while you sleep. They transfer to the next generation. Your father left you effort and character. You can leave your children effort and character and assets. And the assets change everything. Bridge building step 3. Transmit navigational knowledge. Everything you've learned about how the professional world works, how institutions operate, how money behaves, how networks function, how to code switch between environments, how to negotiate, how to present, how to position yourself. All of this navigational knowledge that you acquired painfully and slowly through trial and error and discomfort. Transmit it, deliberately, explicitly, to your children, to the young people in your community, to anyone coming up through the loop who needs to know what you now know. Here's what actually happens when navigational knowledge is transmitted across generations. The next generation starts with it instead of spending decades acquiring it. They don't lose years to the imposter syndrome you battled. They don't miss opportunities because they didn't know the opportunities existed. They don't underprice themselves because they understand what the market values. Each piece of navigational knowledge you transmit is a piece of the bridge. And the bridge gets longer and stronger with each generation that adds to it. Bridge building step 4. Rewrite the family money narrative. Your family has a story about money. It's probably a story of struggle, sacrifice, and limited possibility. Money is hard to come by. We're not the kind of people who have money. You have to work twice as hard to get half as much. These narratives were true descriptions of your family's experience inside the loop, but they function as prescriptions for the next generation. When a child absorbs money is hard to come by, they develop a relationship with money calibrated for difficulty. When they absorb, we're not the kind of people who have money, they develop an identity incompatible with wealth. The narratives become the next generation's invisible inheritance. Rewriting the narrative doesn't mean lying. It means updating. Our family has always worked hard, and now we're also learning to work strategically. We come from a background that didn't have resources, and we're building those resources for the first time. Money used to be a source of stress in our family. We're creating a different relationship with it. Each updated narrative gives the next generation a different starting point. Not the false starting point of money is easy and we're wealthy. The honest, evolving starting point of our family is changing its economic position deliberately, and you're part of that change. Bridge building step 5. Accept that the bridge takes more than one generation. This is the hardest acceptance. You might not complete the escape in your lifetime. You might move from poverty to lower middle class. Your children might move from lower middle class to stable middle class. Their children might move from middle class to genuine financial freedom. The bridge is multi-generational. And that's not failure. That's how structural change actually works. The culture sells the overnight success story. The individual who leaps from poverty to wealth in a single generation through extraordinary effort and talent. These stories exist. They're real. They're also statistically rare. And holding yourself to that standard, expecting to complete in one lifetime what took affluent families many generations to build, is a recipe for shame and paralysis. The real reason the multi-generational perspective matters is that it changes how you evaluate your own progress. If the standard is escape the loop completely in my lifetime, you're likely to feel like a failure because the loop is structurally designed to prevent exactly that. If the standard is move the family's position significantly forward and build the bridge that the next generation will continue, your progress becomes visible and your effort becomes meaningful. Your father moved the family from crisis to stability. You can move it from stability to accumulation. Your children can move it from accumulation to freedom. Each generation adds a section to the bridge. None of them needs to build the whole thing alone. And the bridge your father started building, the one made of 2 jobs and no sleep and sacrifice you'll never fully comprehend, that bridge didn't fail. It got you here, where you can add the next section, with better tools and clearer sight. There's a version of this conversation that ends with, "So pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stop making excuses." That version is popular, profitable, convenient for people who were born on the other side of the loop and prefer to believe the loop is a choice rather than a structure. That's not how this ends. This ends with the truth. The poverty loop is real, it's structural, it's self-reinforcing. It wasn't designed by a single architect. It emerged from the accumulated weight of economic systems, institutional biases, geographic concentration, and psychological inheritance. Your father didn't fail inside it. He performed miracles inside it, keeping a family fed and housed and together on resources that wouldn't cover a comfortable person's monthly entertainment budget. That's not failure. That's the hardest kind of success. The kind nobody celebrates because it doesn't produce wealth. It just produces survival. And survival in this economy is an achievement that doesn't fit on a resume. You're carrying his effort forward, and now you're carrying something else too, understanding. For the first time, maybe for the first time in your family's history, someone in the line can see the full architecture of the loop, not just the financial surface that's visible to everyone, the psychological inheritance that operates beneath awareness, the institutional reinforcement that masquerades as neutral meritocracy, the time deficit that converts effort into maintenance, the opportunity desert that limits what you can imagine, the cost of being poor that extracts money from both sides of the ledger simultaneously. You can see it all now, the full system. The complete map of the thing that's held your family in place while telling each generation that the next one would be free. And seeing it all is the prerequisite for disrupting it. Not a guarantee, a prerequisite, because you can't dismantle what you can't see. You can't navigate what you can't map. You can't escape a structure whose walls are invisible to you. And until this hour, the loop was invisible, operating beneath your awareness, disguised as personal failure, disguised as just how things are for people like you, disguised as the natural order of an economy that rewards effort equally when it has never done anything of the kind. Things don't have to be this way. Not because I'm selling you optimism, because the levers exist, the strategic skill acquisition, the network expansion, the targeted financial knowledge, the psychological repair, the community-based collective strategies, the deliberate generational bridge building that converts your father's platform into a pathway. The levers are real, they're accessible, and they work. But they require something that the loop specializes in preventing: time, patience, long-term orientation. The very things the loop steals by keeping you in survival mode, which means the first act of escape is creating enough stability to think beyond tomorrow, enough margin to plan beyond this month, enough space to see beyond this year. That space is where the bridge gets built. Your father gave you a platform. He gave it with his body and his time, and the years he spent too tired to be fully present but too committed to quit. The least you can do is build on it. The most you can do is build something on it that makes his sacrifice, finally, after all these years, not just a survival story, but the opening chapter of a freedom story. Your children won't know what it cost. That's the point. Start building tonight.